One 72-year-old woman who stood, one 72-year-old woman who stood up, walked straight to the leader, and said 5 words that would change everything. My daughter has a tattoo just like yours. What happened next proves that sometimes the people you're told to fear are the ones who'll ride through hell to save you. But before we continue, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button so you never miss stories like this one. Because what you're about to hear is a true story about promises, courage, and the night one woman's choice 12 years ago came back to save her life. Now let me take you back to where it all began. The rain came down like hammers against the roof of the Red Mesa Diner, each drop a percussion note in the symphony of a November storm that had rolled across the Arizona desert without warning. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed their eternal song, casting everything in that particular shade of tired yellow that belongs only to truck stops and all-night diners where the coffee is always hot and the answers are always scarce. Dorothea Morrison sat alone in the corner booth, her weathered hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. She was 72 years old, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and eyes that had seen more than most people ever would. The kind of eyes that didn't flinch easily. The kind that had looked at blood and broken bodies and kept working anyway, steady and sure, because that was what you did when lives hung in the balance. But tonight those eyes held something they rarely showed. Fear. Her phone sat on the table in front of her screen, dark silent as a tombstone. 3 hours. 3 hours since Ren had called, her voice tight with that particular tone that mothers learn to recognize in their daughters, no matter how many years pass. The tone that says, I'm trying not to scare you, but I'm scared myself. Mom, Ren had said, the connection crackling with static and distance. My car broke down. Highway 89, about 15 miles north of town. I'm okay, but I need help. And then the line had gone dead. Thea had tried calling back 17 times. Each attempt met with the same automated message about the customer being unavailable. She'd gotten in her car, started driving, made it maybe 10 miles before her hands started shaking so badly she had to pull over. Had to stop. Had to breathe. That was an hour ago. Now she sat in this diner trying to collect herself, trying to think clearly through the fog of panic that kept threatening to swallow her whole. Because she knew things that other mothers might not know. She knew that Highway 89 at night was a dark ribbon of asphalt cutting through emptiness, where help was far away and trouble could find you easy. She knew that her daughter was alone out there, vulnerable, and that 3 hours of silence was 3 hours too long. The diner wasn't crowded. A trucker sat at the counter nursing his own coffee, staring at nothing. A young couple occupied a booth near the kitchen, picking at a plate of fries between them. The waitress, a woman named Rita, who'd worked here longer than anyone could remember, moved between tables with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd poured a million cups of coffee and heard a million stories and knew better than to ask questions that weren't her business. The bell above the door chimed. Thea glanced up out of habit, the way everyone in a diner does when someone new arrives, and then she froze. 6 men stood in the doorway. 6 men in black leather vests studded with patches and insignia that told a story you didn't need to be able to read to understand. Heavy boots that tracked water across the linoleum floor. Faces weathered by sun and wind, and roads that stretched longer than most people could imagine. The kind of men who didn't need to announce themselves because their presence did that work for them. Hell's Angels, Northern Arizona chapter. The patch on their backs made it clear. The trucker at the counter suddenly found his coffee very interesting. The young couple went quiet, their eyes fixed on their plates. Rita stopped mid-pour, the coffee pot suspended in air, like she'd forgotten what she was doing. Even the kitchen sounds seemed to dim, as if the cook had decided now was a good time to stop clattering pans. The silence that filled the Red Mesa Diner wasn't the comfortable kind. It was the kind that crawls up your spine and sits heavy in your chest. The kind that makes people look down, look away, look anywhere but at the source of their sudden discomfort. The kind that comes from old fears and older prejudices, from stories told and retold until they become truth, whether they started that way or not. But Dorothea Morrison had never been good at looking away. She'd spent 3 decades as a nurse, first at Fort Bragg when she was young, and her husband Edmund was still alive later at the VA hospital in Phoenix after he died in a helicopter training accident that took 5 good men and left her to raise a daughter alone. She'd seen bikers before, had treated them when they came through the emergency room with road rash and broken bones and injuries they'd earned the hard way. She'd learned early that the leather and the patches didn't tell you who a person was, not really. That underneath all that armor were just men, same as any others, capable of good and bad in equal measure. And she'd also learned in 72 years of living that sometimes the people you're supposed to fear are the ones who'll stand between you and the darkness when everyone else has already run. So Thea stood up. The scrape of her chair against the floor sounded loud in the silence. She saw Rita's eyes go wide, saw the trucker's shoulders tense, saw the young couple exchange a worried glance. But she didn't stop. She picked up the photograph that had been sitting on the table in front of her, the old Polaroid with its faded colors and bent corner, and she walked straight toward the 6 men who'd just entered. The man in front was tall, broad-shouldered, with a gray-streaked beard and eyes the color of flint, deep lines carved through his face like erosion patterns in sandstone, each one a story of miles ridden and promises kept. He wore his authority like he wore his vest naturally without needing to prove it. This was a man who'd earned his place at the front of the line. Thea stopped 3 feet away from him. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "My daughter has a tattoo, just like yours." The diner held its breath. Every eye in the room was on her now, but Thea didn't notice. She was watching the man in front of her, watching the way his expression shifted from neutral caution to something else, something harder to name. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. And 12 years ago, Thea continued holding up the photograph so he could see it. That tattoo saved your life on the Nevada desert. The man went very still. Behind him, his companions shifted, exchanged glances. One of them, a stocky man with iron gray hair and a scar running through his left eyebrow, leaned forward slightly. Another, younger, maybe late 20s, with the kind of lean build that came from hard work rather than gym time, let his hand drift toward his belt in a gesture that looked casual but wasn't. But the man in front, the one Thea had addressed, he didn't move. He just stared at the photograph in her hands, and something in his face cracked open like stone splitting under pressure. "What did you just say?" His voice was low, rough, the kind of voice that carried weight even when it wasn't raised. Thea held the photograph steady. "My daughter, Wren Adelaide Morrison. 12 years ago, she pulled you off Highway 95 in Nevada when you were bleeding out from a gang ambush. She hid you in a cabin 55 miles outside Vegas, stitched you up, kept you alive for 5 days, while men with guns looked for you. And when you woke up, you gave her this." She turned the photograph around so she could see it herself. The image showed a young woman, 28 years old, with dark hair and tired eyes, standing in front of a weathered wooden cabin. Her left shoulder was visible, and on it, fresh enough that the skin around it was still red, was a tattoo of a skull with wings spread wide. The same design that was stitched in leather on the vests of every man in this diner. Almost the same, but not quite. The man reached out slowly, carefully, and took the photograph from Thea's hands. He held it like it was made of glass, like it might shatter if he gripped too hard. His jaw worked, muscles tensing and releasing, as if he was trying to find words that wouldn't come. "Rebecca," he said finally, the name barely more than a whisper. "Her name is Wren." Thea corrected gently. "Wren Adelaide Morrison. She's 40 years old now. And tonight her car broke down on Highway 89, 15 miles north of Flagstaff, and I haven't heard from her in 3 hours." The man looked up from the photograph, and Thea saw something in his eyes that made her chest tighten. "Where?" he asked. "Highway 89. She called me 3 hours ago." The line went dead. "I tried to drive out there myself, but Thea's voice wavered for the first time. "I needed to stop, to think, to breathe." The man turned to his companions. Ironside, the stocky one with the scar, stepped forward. "Yeah, Flint. So that was his name. Flint. Or his road name, at least the one he carried instead of whatever his mother had called him. Hulda Chapter," Flint said, his voice taking on an edge of command that needed no volume to be effective. "Tell them we have a code, Sparrow. Everyone on standby." "Code Sparrow?" the younger one asked, confusion clear in his voice. Ironside shot him a look that could have melted steel. "You don't know the Desert Sparrow story, Canyon. The hell have you been doing in church meetings? I thought that was just—" Canyon trailed off, looking between the older men, realization slowly dawning. "Wait, that was real. Real as the road beneath our tires," Ironside said, already pulling out his phone. And if the sparrow's in trouble, we ride. No questions, no hesitation. That's the code. Flint turned back to Thea. His expression had shifted, hardened into something purposeful. Ma'am, what's your name? Dorothea Morrison. Everyone calls me Thea. Thea, Flint repeated, as if testing the name. Your daughter saved my life. More than that. She saved Kyle Brennan's life too, and she tried to save Tommy Vega even though he was already gone. She didn't know us, didn't know what we were or what we'd done. She just saw men who needed help, and she stopped when anyone else would have kept driving. He paused, and Thea saw his hand drift to his chest, fingers brushing the leather vest over his heart. I made her a promise that night, he continued, a blood promise, that if she ever needed us, we'd come. Doesn't matter when, doesn't matter where, doesn't matter what's between us and her. We'd come. Then come, Thea said simply, because she needs you now. Flint nodded once decisive. We leave in 2 minutes. You ride with me. I've never been on a motorcycle in my life, Thea admitted. You hold on tight and you trust me, Flint said. Can you do that? Thea looked at this man, this stranger who wore the uniform that society had taught her to fear, and she saw something that made the decision easy. She saw someone who kept his promises. Yes, she said, I can do that. The next 2 minutes moved with the efficiency of a military operation. Ironside finished his call, reported that the chapter was on alert and ready to mobilize if needed. Canyon checked his bike, ran through whatever pre-flight checklist bikers used. The other three, whose names Thea hadn't caught yet, conferred in low voices their body language, speaking of coordination born from years of riding together. Rita approached cautiously, her order pad clutched like a shield. You folks need anything before you go? Flint pulled out his wallet, extracted 2 20s, and laid them on the counter. For the coffee and for the trouble. There's no trouble, Rita said quickly. Is everything okay? It will be, Flint told her, and something in the way he said it made it sound less like hope and more like a promise written in iron. They moved toward the door, and Thea followed, her heart pounding now for different reasons. The rain had softened to a steady drizzle, and through the diner windows she could see the 6 motorcycles lined up like sentinels, chrome gleaming under the parking lot lights. Before they reached the exit, Flint stopped, turned back to face the diner. The trucker was still staring at his coffee. The young couple hadn't moved. Rita stood behind the counter, that order pad still clutched tight. Anyone asks, Flint said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. We were never here. Understood. Silence. Then slowly Rita nodded. The trucker took a deliberate sip of his coffee, eyes down. The young man at the booth cleared his throat. Never saw a thing. Flint held the silence for another heartbeat, then pushed through the door into the rain. Outside, Thea found herself standing in a world transformed. The parking lot lights cast halos through the mist, and the 6 motorcycles seemed larger, somehow. More imposing machines built for purpose rather than pleasure. Each one was different in small ways, but united in the essential thing that mattered. They were tools, extensions of the men who rode them, built to eat miles and carry weight and never quit when the road got hard. Flint led her to the bike at the front of the line, a massive machine with chrome exhaust pipes and a seat that looked built for 2. He swung his leg over with the ease of long practice, settled his weight, and looked back at her. You ever ridden behind someone? He asked. On a bicycle when I was 10, Thea said, trying for humor and landing somewhere near hysteria. Close enough, Flint said, and she thought she saw the ghost of a smile cross his face. Okay, here's how this works. You put your hands here. He tapped his waist. You hold on firm, but not so tight I can't breathe. When I lean, you lean with me. Don't try to counterbalance. Don't try to help. Just move with the bike. Can you do that? I can try. That's all anyone can do. Thea climbed on behind him and immediately felt the strangeness of it. The intimacy of sitting this close to a man she'd met 5 minutes ago, her hands on his waist, the warmth of him tangible even through the leather. But there was no time to feel awkward about it because the other riders were already starting their engines and the sound was like thunder rolling across flat ground. Flint reached back, patted her hands once, a gesture of reassurance. Hold tight, Thea. We're going to bring your daughter home. Then he thumbed the ignition. The motorcycle roared to life beneath them, and Thea felt the vibration through every bone in her body, a deep thrumming that seemed to resonate at the frequency of the earth itself. Flint revved the engine once, twice, and around them, the other bikes answered in kind, a chorus of mechanical beasts ready to run. They pulled out of the Red Mesa Diner parking lot in formation tight and controlled 6 bikes moving as one unit through the rain-slick streets of the Flagstaff. And as they hit the highway and the speedometer climbed, Thea Morrison did something she never thought she'd do. She held on to a Hell's Angel and trusted him with everything she had. But to understand why this moment mattered, why 6 men dropped everything to ride into a storm for a woman they'd never met, you have to go back. Back to a different highway, a different storm, a different night when the only thing standing between death and morning was one woman's choice to stop when everyone else kept driving. 12 years earlier, summer 2012, the Nevada desert in June was a special kind of hell, the kind that baked the moisture out of your lungs and turned the horizon into a shimmering lie. Highway 95 cut through it like a scar, a ribbon of black asphalt that connected Vegas to the rest of the world for those who didn't want to fly or couldn't afford to. Wren Adelaide Morrison was 28 years old and she was running. Not from the law, not from debt. She was running from a man named Warren Hayes who'd been her husband for 3 years and her nightmare for most of that time. Running from the apartment in Las Vegas where the walls had learned to absorb her screams. Running from the hospital where she worked as a nurse and pretended the bruises on her arms came from clumsy accidents. Running from a life that had slowly crushed her down until she couldn't remember what it felt like to breathe without fear. Her car was a 15-year-old Toyota with a failing air conditioner and a check engine light that had been on so long she'd stopped seeing it. Everything she owned that mattered fit in 2 duffel bags in the trunk. She had $800 in Mosh, a credit card she knew Warren would cancel the moment he realized she was gone, and a mother in New Mexico who'd told her over and over that the door was always open, no questions asked. It was 5:40 in the afternoon. She'd been driving for 6 hours. The divorce papers were in the glove compartment, signed and notarized. She'd filed them that morning first thing before Warren woke up from his overnight shift at the auto shop. She'd walked out of the courthouse, gotten in her car, and just started driving east away from the city, away from the Strip's neon glow, away from everything that had slowly killed her spirit one day at a time. She told herself she wasn't going to cry. She'd done enough of that already. Instead, she focused on the road, on the white lines disappearing beneath her hood, on the promise of distance, and the hope that maybe, just maybe, she could build something new from the wreckage of what she'd left behind. That's when she saw them. 3 motorcycles riding in a tight formation, maybe 200 yards ahead. Even from a distance, even through the heat shimmer, she could see they were big machines, the kind built for long hauls rather than weekend joyrides. The riders wore leather despite the heat, and she could just make out the patches on their backs. Bikers. Wren's first instinct was to slow down, let them pull away. She'd heard the stories, absorbed the cultural wisdom that said, you didn't mess with motorcycle clubs, didn't get too close, didn't make eye contact. Stay in your lane, mind your business, and hope they do the same. But then the black SUV appeared. It came from nowhere, materializing out of a side road she hadn't even noticed, accelerating, hard to close the distance. No headlights despite the approaching dusk. No warning, just speed and intention. It rammed the rear motorcycle. The impact was brutal, metal meeting metal with a sound that carried even over the wind. The bike went down hard, tumbling across the asphalt at 70 miles per hour, the rider thrown like a rag doll. Sparks flew where metal scraped road. The other 2 bikes swerved, tried to brake, but the SUV was already boxing them in, forcing them toward the shoulder, toward the rocks and sand and certain disaster. Wren's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Her foot hovered over the brake. And in that split second, a memory surfaced with perfect, terrible clarity. 8 months earlier, a parking lot outside their apartment. Warren's hand around her throat, slamming her against the car, while she clawed at his arm and tried to scream. And people walking past, 6 of them. 6 people who saw what was happening, saw her terror, saw her need, and they just kept walking. Kept their eyes down, kept moving, because getting involved was dangerous, because it wasn't their business, because someone else would surely help. No one did. Wren had never forgotten that moment, that feeling of watching salvation walk away while her husband's grip tightened and her vision started to gray at the edges. She'd never forgotten the sound of footsteps fading while she silently begged for anyone at all to just stop. So when she saw 3 men go down hard on Highway 95, when she saw the SUV screech to a halt, and four men in dark clothes emerged with weapons. When every instinct she had screamed at her to keep driving, to not get involved, to save herself, Ren Adelaide Morrison made a choice. She turned the car around. The Toyota's tires squealed as she pulled a U-turn across the median gravel spraying. Her heart hammered so hard she could hear it in her ears, louder than the engine, louder than the voice in her head telling her this was insane, that she was going to get killed, that she couldn't save these men any more than anyone could have saved her. But she drove toward them anyway. By the time she reached the scene, it had descended into chaos. Two of the bikers were down on the ground, one not moving at all, the other trying to crawl toward his fallen bike. The third was on his feet but barely squaring off against two of the attackers while blood ran down the side of his face. The sound of fists hitting flesh carried across the desert. Someone was shouting words lost in the violence. Ren slammed on the brakes 30 yards away, close enough to be seen, but far enough to maybe possibly turn around and run if she had to. Her hands shook on the wheel. Her breath came in sharp gasps. She reached for her phone, tried to dial 911, but there was no signal out here, just empty bars and a useless piece of plastic. So she did the only thing she could think of. She leaned on the horn. The sound split the desert air, long and loud and impossible to ignore. Every head turned toward her car. The violence paused for a heartbeat as seven men tried to process this new variable, this unexpected witness. Ren saw one of the attackers raise a gun, saw it swing toward her, and terror flooded her system so completely she couldn't breathe. But she kept her hand on the horn, kept that sound going, because if they were looking at her, they weren't killing the men on the ground. The biker who was still standing, the one with blood on his face, took advantage of the distraction. He lunged for something on the ground, at a tire iron that had fallen from someone's grip, and swung it in a wide arc that connected with an attacker's skull. The sound of the impact was sickening. The man went down like his strings had been cut. The others scattered, moving for the SUV, discipline breaking down into self-preservation. The one with the gun fired a shot, but it went wild, sparking off asphalt 10 feet from Ren's car. She flinched but held her ground, hands still on the horn, even though every fiber of her being was screaming at her to drive, to run, to get the hell away from here. The SUV's engine roared, tires spun caught, and it rocketed away, leaving dust and blood and broken men in its wake. Silence rushed back in, broken only by the sound of labored breathing and Ren's car engine idling. She sat frozen for a long moment, her whole body shaking, unable to believe she was still alive. Then she looked at the scene in front of her, at the three men on the ground, and her training kicked in. She was a nurse, and people needed help. Ren grabbed the first aid kit from under her passenger seat, the heavy-duty one she'd assembled herself, and carried everywhere after Warren had put her in the emergency room the first time. She got out of the car on legs that didn't want to hold her weight and ran toward the fallen bikers. The first one she reached wasn't breathing. She checked for a pulse anyway, pressed her fingers to his throat, found nothing. The impact had killed him instantly. His helmet cracked open like an egg, blood pooling on the asphalt. She whispered a prayer she didn't really believe in and moved on. The second man was conscious but dazed. His left arm bent at an angle that made her stomach turn. Broken ribs, probably from the way he was breathing. Possible internal bleeding. But alive. "Stay still," she told him, her voice surprisingly steady. "Help is coming." It was a lie. Help wasn't coming. There was no signal out here. But sometimes lies were kinder than truth. The third man, the one who'd been fighting, was sitting with his back against the wreckage of his motorcycle, one hand pressed to his side. Blood seeped between his fingers, dark and steady. His face was gray beneath the blood and road rash. He looked at Ren with eyes that were trying to focus and couldn't quite manage it. "Who the hell are you?" he rasped. "A nurse," Ren said, kneeling beside him. "Let me see." He moved his hand. The wound underneath was bad, a deep gash that had torn through his leather vest and the shirt beneath, cutting into the meat of his side. Not arterial, thank God, but serious enough that he'd bleed out if she didn't do something. "Your friend," Ren said, nodding toward the first man. "I'm sorry." The biker's jaw tightened. "Tommy." "I'm sorry about Tommy," she repeated. "But you two, I can help, if you trust me." He studied her for a long moment, this stranger who'd appeared out of nowhere and honked her horn at armed men. "Why'd you come back?" "Because someone should have stopped for me once," Ren said simply, "and no one did." Something in his expression shifted, became a little less guarded. "What's your name?" "Ren." Flint, he said. Then because the blood loss was making him lightheaded and unguarded, he added Silas McCade. But everyone calls me Flint. Okay, Flint, Wren said, already opening her first aid kit. I need to get you somewhere I can work. There's a cabin about 50 miles from here off the grid, my grandfather's place. Can you make it that far? Don't have much choice, Flint muttered. No, Wren agreed. Don't. Getting two wounded men into her small Toyota was a nightmare of blood and pain and improvisation. Kyle, the one with the broken arm, could at least help a little. Flint had to be half carried, his weight heavy against Wren's shoulder, his breathing getting more labored with every step. She left Tommy where he'd fallen, covered with a leather jacket that Flint insisted on leaving, and drove away from Highway 95 at as fast as her failing Toyota would go, taking dirt roads and abandoned trails she remembered from childhood summers spent at her grandfather's cabin. The men with guns might come back. The police would eventually investigate. But right now, these two men needed help more than they needed questions, and Wren had learned the hard way that sometimes the law didn't protect the people who needed it most. The cabin appeared out of the desert like a memory-weathered wood, in a tin roof and windows that hadn't seen glass in years. It was 55 miles from anywhere that mattered, with no phone line and no electricity and nothing but propane tanks, and a well that still worked if you primed it right. Her grandfather had built it in the 50s as a hunting lodge, and after he died, nobody had bothered to sell it or tear it down. It just sat here waiting for someone to need it. Tonight, 3 people needed it badly. Wren got them inside, got them situated on the floor, because the old furniture was too rotten to trust. She worked by lantern light, her hands steady even though her mind was screaming. She stitched Flint's side with 19 careful sutures using supplies from her kit and technique learned in 1,000 shifts in Vegas emergency rooms. She set Kyle's arm as best she could, splinting it with boards torn from the cabin wall. She gave them morphine from her personal supply, the stuff she'd been stockpiling for months in case Warren ever hurt her badly enough that she couldn't make it to a hospital. She worked through the night, checking vitals, adjusting bandages, making sure neither of them was bleeding internally or going into shock. And when the sun rose over the Nevada desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, both men were still breathing. That was day 1. Day 2 brought fever and pain as their bodies tried to fight off infection and trauma. Wren alternated between them, checking temperatures, administering antibiotics, forcing fluids. Kyle drifted in and out of consciousness. Flint stayed awake longer, watching her with those Flint gray eyes, asking questions she didn't always answer. "Why are you doing this?" he asked on day 3 when his fever had broken, and he could think clearly enough to wonder. "You don't know us. For all you know, we're the bad guys." Wren was changing his bandages, her hands gentle but efficient. "Are you?" "Depends who you ask." "I'm asking you." Flint was quiet for a long moment. "We're not saints, but we weren't the ones who started that fight. Those were Iron Skull's rival charter from California. They've been trying to muscle in on our territory for months. We were just riding through when they hit us. And Tommy Vega, he was 26, had a kid on the way." Flint's voice went rough. "He was my responsibility. I should have seen it coming." "You can't see everything coming," Wren said softly. "Believe me." He looked at her, then really looked, and she could see him noticing things he'd been too hurt to register before. The fading bruise on her collarbone, the way she flinched when he moved too quickly, the fact that she was out here alone, off the grid, helping strangers because she'd learned not to trust the systems that were supposed to protect people. "Someone hurt you," he said. It wasn't a question. Wren kept working on the bandages. "Yeah, recently enough. They still a threat?" "I don't know," Wren admitted. "I filed for divorce yesterday morning. Then I drove until I couldn't drive anymore. Then I saw you and I turned around and now I'm here. I don't know what happens next." Flint reached up with his good hand, caught her wrist gently. "What happens next is you saved 2 lives. That matters. That means something. And does it?" Wren's voice was so tired. "Because most days I don't feel like anything I do matters at all." "It matters to me," Flint said. "It matters to Kyle, and it would matter to Tommy if he was still here to say so. You stopped when you didn't have to. You risked yourself for strangers. That's not nothing. That's everything." Day 4, Kyle was strong enough to sit up, strong enough to add his thanks to Flint's. He was younger, maybe early 20s, with a baby face that made him look even more vulnerable, with his arm in a makeshift sling and bruises flowering across his ribs. My mom's a nurse, Kyle said, his voice still rough with pain. She'd like you. I hope I never have to meet her, Ren said with a tired smile. No offense, but I'd prefer if your family didn't know about this. Because of your ex, Kyle asked, then winced as Flint shot him a look. Sorry, not my business. It's okay, Ren said. She'd been alone with these men for 4 days. You had seen them at their most vulnerable, had literally held their lives in her hands. Some boundaries had dissolved whether she wanted them to or not. Yes, because of my ex. He's not someone I want finding me. Ever. He comes looking, Flint said, and his voice carried a weight that made it more than words. We'll make sure he doesn't find you. You don't owe me anything, Ren protested. The hell we don't. That night while Kyle slept and the desert cooled outside, Flint did something Ren would never fully understand. He found a piece of charcoal from the old fireplace. He tore a page from a water-damaged book on the shelf, and by the light of a kerosene lamp he drew. When he was done, he showed it to her. A skull with wings spread wide, rendered in black charcoal with surprising detail. Beneath it in careful letters the words, paid in blood, kept in honor. This is our chapter's mark, Flint said, but I'm changing it, just slightly. See here. He pointed to the skull's left eye socket. This one's hollow, empty. That's the difference. That's how we'll know. Know what? That you're protected, Flint said simply. If you ever need us, if you ever get in trouble you can't handle alone, you show this mark to any Hell's Angel in Arizona. They'll know. They'll come. No questions. No hesitation. That's my promise to you, Ren Morrison. A blood promise. Ren looked at the drawing at this man who'd been a stranger 5 days ago and was now offering her something she couldn't quite name. Protection, maybe? Or family? Or just the knowledge that somewhere in the world someone would answer if she called. I can't accept this, she whispered. You already did, Flint said. The moment you turned your car around on Highway 95. You chose to stop. Now I'm choosing to make sure that choice doesn't get you killed. He offered her the paper. After a long moment, Ren took it. And the next morning, while Flint slept and Kyle kept watch from the cabin door, Ren Morrison drove 60 miles to a tattoo parlor in a town so small it barely had a name. She showed the artist the charcoal drawing. She pointed to her left shoulder, the one over her heart. Here, she said, exactly like this. Don't change anything. The artist, a woman in her 50s with arms covered in her own ink, studied the drawing, then studied Ren. You sure, honey, this is a Hell's Angel's mark? That's not something you wear lightly. I'm sure, Ren said. She didn't tell the woman that she was getting this tattoo, not because she believed in the promise it represented, but because she needed something to remind herself that she'd done something good, that she'd stopped when others kept driving, that she'd saved 2 lives when her own felt worthless. She needed this mark on her skin as proof that she was more than the broken thing Warren had tried to make her. The tattoo took 3 hours. It hurt like hell. And when it was done, when Ren looked at herself in the mirror and saw that skull with wings spread wide over her heart, she cried for the first time since leaving Vegas. She went back to the cabin, spent one more night making sure both men were stable, that their wounds were clean, that they'd make it when help arrived. And then before dawn on day 6 she left. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't leave her phone number or her address or any way to find her. She just took her 2 duffel bags, got in her Toyota and drove east toward New Mexico, and the mother who was waiting with open arms and no judgments. On the seat beside her, she left a note written on the back of Flint's drawing. It said, "Don't look for me. I need to disappear. Thank you for the promise. I hope I never have to use it." She signed it with just her initial, W. When Flint woke that morning and found her gone, he sat on the cabin floor with that note in his hands for a long time. Kyle, stronger now, able to move without help, waited silently. "We're going to find her," Kyle said finally. "Right. We're going to track her down, thank her properly." Flint looked at the note, at that single letter signature, at the words, "I need to disappear." "No," he said quietly. "We're going to respect what she wants. She helped us when she didn't have to. Least we can do is let her vanish if that's what she needs. But the promise? The promise stands," Flint said firmly. "Forever. She carries our mark now. If she ever needs us, she knows how to call. Until then, we honor her choice. We let her go. Kyle nodded slowly. What do we call her in the stories? We can't use her real name if she's trying to disappear. Flint thought about it. About this woman who'd appeared out of the desert like a bird, small and fierce and unafraid, who'd pulled them from death's grip with gentle hands and fierce determination, who'd vanished as quickly as she'd come, leaving nothing behind but a debt that could never really be repaid. The sparrow, he said finally. The desert sparrow, that's what we call her. And if anyone in the chapter ever meets a woman with this mark, he held up the drawing, they answer the call, no matter what. That story, The Legend of the Desert Sparrow, became part of the Northern Arizona chapter's oral history. Flint told it at every church meeting, every time a new member patched in. He told it until every man in the charter knew it by heart, knew that somewhere out there was a woman who'd saved brothers when she had every reason to just keep driving. And if she ever showed that mark, if she ever called in, the promise the entire chapter would ride. But as years passed and no call came, some of the younger members started to wonder if maybe it was just a story, a legend that Flint and the old-timers told to reinforce the code, to remind everyone that sometimes the people you'd least expect turn out to be the ones who save your life. Canyon, the youngest member, the one riding with them tonight, had always thought it was beautiful fiction. Until 72-year-old Dorothea Morrison walked up to them in a diner and showed them a Polaroid of the woman who'd become a myth. Now as they rode through the rain toward Highway 89, as the speedometer climbed and the miles disappeared beneath their tires, Canyon was learning that some legends were just truth waiting for its moment to return. The road ahead was dark, the storm was getting worse, and somewhere out there the desert sparrow was alone and in trouble. But not for long, because some promises once made never expire. They just wait patient as stone for the night when they're finally called to account. The rain turned the highway into a ribbon of black glass reflecting nothing but darkness and the occasional flash of distant lightning. Wren Adelaide Morrison sat in her dead car on the shoulder of Highway 89 watching water stream down the windshield in patterns that looked almost deliberate, like someone was writing messages she couldn't quite read. 3 hours and 17 minutes since the engine had coughed, sputtered and died. 3 hours and 12 minutes since she'd called her mother. 3 hours and 11 minutes since the phone battery had given up, leaving her in silence, broken only by rain drumming on metal. She was 40 years old and she'd learned a long time ago that silence could be more terrifying than any sound. The Toyota that had carried her away from Vegas 12 years ago was finally completely dead. She'd known it was coming. The check engine light had evolved from occasional warning to permanent fixture. The oil consumption had gotten worse. The transmission had started making sounds that no transmission should make. But she'd kept nursing it along, kept pouring money into it she couldn't really spare, because this car represented something more than transportation. It represented the night she'd chosen to save someone instead of saving herself. It represented the moment she'd learned she was stronger than she thought. And now it sat on Highway 89 like a tombstone marking the end of something she couldn't name. Wren pulled her jacket tighter, though it did nothing against the cold that was seeping into her bones. The heater had died with the engine. Her phone was a useless brick of glass and silicon. The road stretched empty in both directions, no headlights visible through the rain, no signs of civilization except the asphalt itself. She tried flagging down 3 cars in the first hour. All 3 had sped past without slowing, their taillights disappearing into the storm like they'd never existed at all. She couldn't really blame them. A woman alone on a dark highway waving her arms in the rain probably looked like the opening scene of a horror movie, or a scam, or any one of a dozen bad situations that smart people avoided by keeping their foot on the gas and their eyes straight ahead. She knew that logic intimately. She'd employed it herself once upon a time, before she learned what it felt like to be the person everyone drove past. Movement in her rearview mirror made her heart jump, headlights finally approaching from behind. But something about them was wrong. They were too high, too wide-spaced. A truck, maybe. And they were coming faster than they should on a rain-slick road without the caution of someone who'd spotted a disabled vehicle. Wren's hands found the door locks by instinct, pressing them down, even though she knew how useless that gesture was. If someone wanted in, a lock wouldn't stop them. It was security theater, a child's magic spell against the dark. The truck slowed as it approached. Then it pulled onto the shoulder 20 yards behind her, close enough to pin her car against the guardrail, far enough that she couldn't see the driver's face through the rain. The engine idled. Headlights blazed in her mirrors, turning her car into a fishbowl of light and shadow. Wren's breath came fast and shallow. Every instinct she'd developed over 12 years of living, quietly, carefully, and visibly, was screaming at her now. Wrong. This was wrong. The timing was wrong. The approach was wrong. Everything about this situation felt like a noose tightening. A door opened. Someone got out. Through the rain-distorted rear window, Wren could make out a figure. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the loose coordination of someone who'd had too much to drink. He approached her car slowly, not threatening exactly, but not careful either. Like he had every right to be here, every right to whatever he wanted. He knocked on her window. Wren didn't move, didn't respond, kept her eyes straight ahead. Maybe if she didn't acknowledge him, he'd give up, get back in his truck, drive away. Maybe silence was still a shield that worked. The knocking got louder, harder. Fist against glass instead of knuckles. "Wren, I know you're in there. Open up." Her blood turned to ice. She knew that voice. Dalton Cooper. The name alone was enough to unlock a cascade of memories she'd worked hard to bury. A mining accident 13 years ago now. She'd been volunteering at the emergency station near the Flagstaff copper mine when they'd brought in 3 men with crushed injuries from a partial tunnel collapse. Dalton had been one of them, young then, maybe 25, with scared eyes and a shattered hand, and gratitude that had curdled over the months into something else. Something obsessive. He'd followed her home from the clinic, shown up at the hospital where she worked, sent flowers and letters and gifts she never asked for. He'd been convinced they had a connection, that her professional kindness meant something more, that her gentle rejections were just tests he needed to pass. She'd moved to avoid him, changed her shifts. Eventually he'd seemed to give up, and Wren had convinced herself it was over. But here he was 13 years later, pounding on her window in the rain like no time had passed at all. "Wren, come on, I just want to talk. I heard you were back in town. We should catch up." His words slurred at the edges, vowels going soft the way they did when alcohol dissolved the boundaries most people maintained. Not angry yet, but the potential for anger was there, coiled in every syllable like a spring under tension. Wren's hand found her purse, fumbled for her phone before she remembered it was dead. No cavalry coming. No help available. Just her and Dalton and a whole lot of empty highway. "I'm fine," she called through the glass, keeping her voice level with an effort. "I called my mother. She's on her way. You can go." "Your mom," Dalton laughed, the sound wrong, somehow too high, too loose. "Thea Morrison, I saw her at the diner an hour ago. She looked pretty comfortable talking to those bikers who rolled in." Wren's heart stuttered. Bikers. Her mother talking to bikers. The probability of that being coincidence was approximately 0, which meant something had happened. Something had changed. The careful equilibrium she'd maintained for 12 years was shifting under her feet like sand. "Then I'll wait for a tow truck," Wren said. "In this weather, they're not coming out here tonight, and you know it." Dalton tried the door handle, found it locked. "Come on, don't be like this. I'm trying to help. I can give you a ride. We can talk, catch up. Remember when we used to talk? We never talked." Wren thought but didn't say. "You talked at me while I tried to do my job, and you turned professional compassion into a romance that existed only in your head." She heard other doors opening, other voices joining Dalton's, rough and male and emboldened by whatever they had been drinking. 2 more, maybe 3. She couldn't see clearly, through the rain. Couldn't count, could only feel the situation deteriorating, like ice cracking beneath her weight. "Dalton, just leave," she said louder now, letting fear sharpen her voice into something that might cut through his alcohol haze. "Please, just go." "Not until you talk to me." His fist hit the window again, harder this time, hard enough that she heard the safety glass protest a while. 13 years, Wren. 13 years I've been thinking about you, wondering where you went, and now you're back, and you won't even look at me." One of the other voices, younger, uncertain. "Dalton, man, maybe we should just—" "Shut up, Everett." Dalton's voice had edges, now the anger starting to surface through the alcohol. "I'm handling this." Handling, that word choice made Wren's skin crawl. She was a problem to be handled, an obstacle to be managed, not a person with her own will and her own right to say no. She'd heard that language before, in a different voice from a different man who thought he owned her because a piece of paper said he could. The memory of Warren's hands around her throat flashed through her mind so vividly she could almost feel the pressure. The panic, the desperate certainty that this was how she died. And right behind that memory came another one sharper, more recent in the grand scheme of things. Highway 95. 3 motorcycles going down. A choice to turn around when everyone else kept driving. That choice had changed her, had shown her she was capable of courage even when every fiber of her being screamed to run. And if she could be brave for strangers, if she could risk herself for men she'd never met, then surely she could be brave for herself now. Wren unlocked the door. She opened it fast before Dalton could react and stepped out into the rain with her keys clutched in her fist, the points protruding between her knuckles like claws. Not much of a weapon, but it was what she had. "You want to talk," she said, her voice carrying over the rain. "Fine, we'll talk. Right here, right now, and then you leave." Dalton blinked, surprised by her sudden appearance, by the steel in her voice. He was bigger than she'd remembered, or maybe she'd just gotten smaller in her memories, eroding him down to something manageable. He wore a flannel shirt soaked through with rain jeans that hung loose on a frame that had lost muscle mass, boots that had seen better days. His face was flushed eyes, red-rimmed stubble, uneven. This was what 13 years of obsession looked like, apparently. Worn and desperate and sad. Behind him, 2 other men stood in the rain. One was older, heavy-set, with the look of someone who'd spent too many years doing hard labor and drinking hard liquor. The other was younger, skinny, with nervous eyes that kept darting between Wren and Dalton, like he wasn't sure how this was supposed to go. "Wren," Dalton said, and his voice went soft, almost pleading. "I just wanted to see you, to explain. I know I came on too strong before, but I've changed. I'm better now. You followed me to a dark highway in the middle of a storm with 2 drunk friends," Wren said flatly. "That's not better, that's worse." "I'm not drunk," Dalton protested, though the way he swayed slightly contradicted that claim. "I had a couple beers, that's all. Harlan here, yeah, he's had a few, but I'm fine. I'm thinking clearly." The older man, Harlan, apparently laughed. It was an ugly sound. "That's your Wren, the nurse you've been crying about for years. She's pretty dolt, I'll give you that, but she don't look interested." "Shut up, Harlan," Dalton said without heat. His attention was all on Wren, focused with the kind of intensity that made her want to step back to put the car between them. "Wren, listen, I know you said no before. I know you weren't interested. But that was a long time ago. We're different people now. Older. I thought maybe we could start fresh. Try again." "There's nothing to try," Wren said, keeping her voice steady even as her heart hammered against her ribs. "I was never interested, Dalton. Not then, not now. I was doing my job. You were a patient. That's all it ever was." Something flickered in Dalton's expression, hurt morphing into anger, morphing into something worse. Denial, maybe. The refusal to accept reality when reality didn't match the story he'd been telling himself for 13 years. "That's bullshit," he said, voice rising. "You cared. I saw it. The way you looked at me, the way you touched my hand when you were bandaging it, the way you smiled." "I smile at all my patients," Wren interrupted. "It's called bedside manner. It doesn't mean anything." "It meant something to me." The shout echoed across the empty highway, raw and desperate. Wren flinched despite herself, and Dalton saw it, saw her fear, and something in his face crumpled. "I'm sorry," he said, hands coming up in a gesture that was probably meant to be placating, but just looked threatening. "I didn't mean to yell. I just—" God, Wren, do you know what it's like? 13 years. The mine closed. I lost my job, lost my apartment. I've got nothing, nothing except this idea that maybe if I could just talk to you, if I could just make you understand." He took a step toward her. Wren took a step back, and her foot came down wrong on the rain-slick shoulder. Her ankle rolled. Pain shot up her leg, bright and sharp, and she went down hard, her knee hitting gravel, her hands barely catching her weight. "Shit, Wren, I didn't—" Dalton moved toward her, reaching down to help. "Don't touch me!" Wren scrambled backward, ignoring the pain in her ankle, ignoring the rain, ignoring everything except the need to maintain distance. "Don't you dare touch me! I was just trying to help." "I don't want your help. I want you to leave." Harlan laughed again. "She's a firecracker, Dalt. Maybe you should just take what you came for. She owes you right for all those years of waiting." The younger one, Everett, made a noise of protest. "Harlan, that's not cool. We should just go. This is messed up." You got a better idea? Harlan challenged. We drove all the way out here in the rain because Dalton's been mooning over this woman for years, and now you want to leave empty-handed. She's not a thing to take, Everett said, his voice gaining strength. She's a person, and she said no. So yeah, we should go. Wren used their argument as cover to get her feet back under her to stand despite the throbbing pain in her ankle. She kept the car at her back, her keys still clutched tight, her mind racing through options that all ended badly. She couldn't outrun them, not with a sprained ankle. She couldn't fight them, not 3-on-1. She couldn't reason with them because Dalton was beyond reason, and Harlan was beyond caring, and Everett, while he seemed to have some conscience left, wasn't in charge. So she did the only thing she could think of. She ran, not down the highway where they could follow easily in the truck, into the desert, into the scrub brush and rocks and darkness where the truck couldn't go, and where maybe, just maybe, she could hide until they gave up. Her ankles screamed with every step. The rain turned the ground treacherous, all mud and loose stones. She could hear Dalton shouting behind her, could hear boots pounding as he gave chase. Wren, stop. You're going to hurt yourself. Just come back and we'll talk. She didn't stop. She pushed deeper into the darkness, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her vision blurring with rain and tears and pain. 20 yards, 30, 40. The voices behind her were getting closer. Dalton was faster than he looked, or maybe desperation gave him speed the way fear gave her endurance. Her foot caught on something, a root or a rock, and she went down again this time, hard enough to knock the wind from her lungs. She lay there for a second, gasping, tasting blood, where she'd bitten her tongue, feeling the rain hammer down on her back like judgment. Dalton crashed through the brush 10 feet away, breathing hard, searching. Wren, please, he called out, and he sounded like he was crying. I don't want to hurt you. I never wanted to hurt you. I just wanted you to see me. Really see me. Was that so wrong? Yes, Wren thought, but couldn't say because her lungs were still trying to remember how to work. Yes, it was wrong, because what you want doesn't override what I want. Because your loneliness doesn't obligate me to fill it. Because I don't owe you anything just because you decided I did. She tried to push herself up, tried to crawl deeper into the darkness, but her ankle gave out and she collapsed again, with a sound that was half sob, half scream of frustration. Dalton heard it. She saw his silhouette turn toward her own, saw him start moving in her direction. And then she heard something else. A sound that started low and far away and grew steadily louder, a deep thrumming that she felt in her chest before she really heard it with her ears. Multiple engines, big ones, moving fast and getting closer. Motorcycles, 6 of them from the sound of it. The headlights appeared first, cutting through the rain like searchlights illuminating Highway 89 in harsh white light. Then the bikes themselves rolling up in a tight formation that spoke of discipline and purpose, engines throttling down as they slowed to a stop around Wren's dead Toyota. Dalton froze still 10 feet from where Wren lay hidden in the brush. Through the rain and the darkness, Wren could see the riders dismounting, see the leather vests that marked them as clearly as any uniform. And she could see one more thing, something that made her heart stutter and restart at a different rhythm. Her mother climbing off the back of the lead bike with surprising grace for a woman her age, moving immediately toward the Toyota, calling out, "Wren, Wren, honey, where are you?" Wren's voice came out as a croak. "Here, I'm here." She tried to stand again, managed it this time despite the pain, and started limping back toward the highway. Dalton grabbed her arm, not hard, not hurting, just holding. "Wren, wait. Who are these people? Why is your mother with bikers?" She looked at his hand on her arm, then at his face, and she saw it finally. Not a threat, not really. Just a sad, broken man who'd built a fantasy in his head and confused it with reality, who'd convinced himself that if he just tried hard enough, wanted it enough, the universe would give him what he deserved. "Let go of me, Dalton," she said quietly. "I just need 5 minutes to explain." Let her go. The new voice was iron wrapped in gravel, coming from a man who'd appeared at the edge of the brush without making a sound. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a gray-streaked beard and eyes that had seen too much to be impressed by Dalton Cooper's particular brand of desperation. Wren knew that face. Older now, lined with 12 additional years of road and weather, but unmistakable. Flint. Silas McCade. The man she'd pulled off Highway 95 and stitched back together in a cabin that smelled like dust and history. "Who the hell are you?" Dalton demanded, though his hand loosened on Wren's arm. "Someone who owes this woman a debt," Flint said, His eyes found Ren's in the darkness, and she saw the recognition there. Saw the moment he connected the woman in front of him to the memory he'd been carrying for 12 years. And someone who doesn't take kindly to people who can't hear the word no. Dalton let go of Ren's arm, completely stepping back, suddenly aware that the dynamics had shifted in a direction he hadn't anticipated. This is none of your business. This is between me and Ren. There is no you and Ren, Flint said, his voice never rising, never needing to. There's Ren who wants you to leave, and there's you who needs to learn that wanting something doesn't make it yours. More figures emerged from the darkness. The other bikers moving to flank Flint, creating a wall of leather and intent between Ren and Dalton. Her mother broke through them, reaching Ren, pulling her into a hug that smelled like rain and fear and relief. Are you hurt? Thea asked, pulling back to look at her daughter. Your ankle. Sprained, I think. Ren managed. Mom, what are you doing here? How did you... I'll explain later. Right now, can you walk? I can try. They started moving toward the highway, Thea supporting Ren's weight, the wall of bikers maintaining position between them and Dalton. But Dalton wasn't done, wasn't ready to accept that this was over. Ren, wait. You don't understand. My brother, Boyd, he said... He cut off abruptly as Flint turned back to face him. Your brother, Flint's voice had gone very quiet. Boyd Cooper, former sheriff's deputy, got fired for excessive force about 2 years back. Dalton nodded, confused by the recognition. Yeah, how do you... Because Boyd Cooper has been on our radar for 6 months, Flint said. He's been running an extortion scheme targeting people with outstanding warrants, threatening to turn them in unless they pay him off. He's Dirty Dalton. And if he told you to come find Ren, it wasn't because he cared about your feelings. It was because he's using you. The color drained from Dalton's face. That's not... Boyd wouldn't... Boyd would, said another voice, this one coming from the highway. Ren turned to see a stocky man with iron gray hair stepping forward. Boyd Cooper is currently wanted for questioning in 3 counties. And if he's involved with Ren Morrison, then we need to know why. He's not involved with me, Ren started to say, but Flint held up a hand. Let's get you somewhere dry and safe first, he said. Then we can sort out the rest. They helped Ren back to the highway where the 6 motorcycles waited like steel sentinels. Her car sat dark and dead useless now, a chapter of her life that had finally closed. The rain had softened to a drizzle, and through the clouds a few stars were trying to break through. Dalton followed at a distance, no longer aggressive, just lost. Harlan had disappeared back to the truck. Everett stood awkwardly by the shoulder hands in his pockets, looking like he wanted to apologize but didn't know how. Flint removed his leather vest, revealing a plain black t-shirt underneath. He handed the vest to one of the other bikers, then turned so Ren could see his chest. There over his heart was a tattoo, a skull with wings spread wide. The same design she had drawn 12 years ago. The same design she wore on her left shoulder. Except his had one additional element she'd never seen before. Below the skull in careful script, paid in blood, kept in honor. I never forgot, Flint said quietly, his voice pitched for her ears alone. Told myself if I ever got the chance to repay what you did, I wouldn't hesitate. Looks like tonight's that chance. Ren's eyes filled with tears that had nothing to do with rain. I never thought I'd see you again. Funny thing about promises, Flint said. They have a way of finding their moment. Behind them, car headlights appeared on the highway, approaching fast. Not the cautious speed of someone driving through bad weather. Urgent speed. Purpose speed. The vehicle that pulled up was a black pickup truck newer than Dalton's, with light bars on the roof and a push bumper on the front. The kind of modifications civilians made when they wanted to look like law enforcement without actually being law enforcement. The door opened and a man stepped out. He was taller than Dalton, broader, with the same basic features, but harder somehow, like life had filed away anything soft and left only edges. He wore jeans and a tactical vest over a plain shirt, and he moved with the confidence of someone who'd spent years wearing a badge and hadn't quite let go of the authority it represented. Boyd Cooper. Ren felt Thea tense beside her, felt the bikers shift their stance slightly, becoming more than just a group of men and transforming into something tactical, something prepared. Well, Boyd said, his voice carrying easy across the distance. Looks like we got ourselves a situation here. Flint stepped forward, putting himself between Boyd and Ren with the kind of casual movement that managed to be both unthreatening and absolutely clear about its intention. No situation, just some people helping someone whose car broke down. Nothing to see here. Boyd's smile didn't reach his eyes. That right? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like 6 members of a known motorcycle club are harassing my brother and interfering with a private conversation. Your brother was chasing a woman through the desert in the rain after she told him to leave her alone, Flint said. That's not a private conversation. That's harassment. Maybe assault. Depends on the district attorney. And you're what the morality police. Boyd's hand drifted toward his hip, where Wren could see the outline of a holstered weapon. Last I checked, Hell's Angels don't have a great track record with law enforcement. Last I checked, Flint said, his voice still calm, still level. You weren't law enforcement anymore. Just a civilian with a gun and a chip on his shoulder. The tension ratcheted up another notch. Wren could feel it in the air, that electric potential that meant violence was one wrong word away from becoming inevitable. She stepped forward, putting herself beside Flint despite Thea's grip on her arm trying to hold her back. Boyd, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. What do you want? Boyd's attention shifted to her and his expression changed, became something calculating. Wren Morrison, or should I say Wren Hayes. You've been using your mother's maiden name for 12 years now, ever since you left Vegas and your husband Warren. Smart move changing your name. Made it harder to find you. Warren's been dead for 8 years, Wren said. Cirrhosis. I went to his funeral to make sure. But you kept the new name, kept hiding. Why is that, Wren? She didn't answer, just stared at him, trying to figure out what game he was playing. Boyd smiled. I did some digging, found out some interesting things, like how you came into $50,000 6 months ago. Insurance payout from your father's policy, the one that finally matured. $50,000 is a lot of money for a woman living on a nurse's salary. Wren's blood went cold. How do you know about that? I've got friends in the system, friends who owe me favors, friends who can access financial records if I ask nicely. Boyd took a step closer. Here's the thing. I've got some debts of my own. Gambling debts, if you want the truth. $80,000 to people who don't take I owe us. And I'm thinking, here's Wren Morrison all alone. No family except her elderly mother sitting on 50 grand that she doesn't really need. Maybe we could work out an arrangement. You're trying to extort me, Wren said flatly. I'm trying to help both of us out of a tight spot, Boyd corrected. You give me the money, I forget I ever found you. Your secret stays secret. Everyone wins. What secret? Flint asked, his voice sharp. Boyd's smile widened. That's between me and Wren. But Wren was done with secret, done with hiding, done with letting fear make her decisions. 12 years she'd spent looking over her shoulder, changing her name, building a life in the shadows because she was afraid of what Warren might do if he found her. And when Warren died, she'd kept hiding anyway because the habit was too deeply ingrained to break. No more. There is no secret, she said loud enough for everyone to hear. I left my abusive husband 12 years ago. Filed for divorce, changed my name, moved away. That's it. That's the whole story. And you thinking you can use that against me, thinking I'm ashamed of surviving, thinking I'll pay you to keep quiet about the fact that I chose life over death, that just shows how little you understand about anything. Boyd's smile faltered. Wren, you don't want to make an enemy of me. You made yourself my enemy when you tried to turn my survival into your payday. Wren shot back. And you made a bigger mistake when you sent Dalton after me, manipulating him using his feelings to do your dirty work. She turned to Dalton, who stood by his truck, looking shell-shocked. He used you. Your brother used you. Told you I was back in town knowing you'd come find me, knowing it would scare me, knowing I'd be vulnerable. He was counting on me being desperate enough to pay him off to make all of this go away. But I'm not desperate anymore. Dalton looked at Boyd and something crumbled in his expression. You said she wanted to see me. You said she'd been asking about me. I said what I needed to say to get you moving, Boyd said, not even bothering to deny it. Jesus, Dalton, you've been pathetic about this woman for 13 years. I did you a favor, gave you an excuse to go after what you wanted. What I wanted, Dalton said slowly, was for someone to see me as something other than a screw-up. And you just proved that even my own brother sees me as a tool to use. He walked to his truck, got in without another word, and drove away. Everett hesitated, looked at Wren, mouthed the word sorry, and followed. which left Boyd standing alone against 6 bikers, a 72-year-old woman, and one nurse with a sprained ankle who'd had enough. "You need to leave," Flint said. It wasn't a suggestion. Boyd's hand was still near his gun. "Or what you're going to assault a former officer of the law, I'd love to see you try. I've got friends in every precinct in 3 counties. You touch me, and I'll have every cop in Arizona looking for you." "You're right," Flint said. "We're not going to touch you." He pulled out his phone, pressed a button, and held it up. "But we are going to play this recording for the authorities. The one where you admitted to extortion, to accessing protected financial records illegally, to conspiracy to harass. You want to call your friends in the precincts, go ahead. But I'm guessing they won't be too happy to learn you've been running dirty while trading on their goodwill." Boyd's face went white, then red. "You're bluffing." Flint pressed another button, and Boyd's voice filled the air, tinny from the phone speaker, but clear enough. "I've got friends in the system, friends who can access financial records if I ask nicely." The iron-gray biker Ironside stepped forward. "Arizona's a one-party consent state. Means Flint here can record any conversation he's part of without telling you. And that recording, that's enough for an arrest warrant minimum. Probably enough for conviction if you've been doing this to other people too." Boyd's hand moved toward his gun. 5 bikers moved in response, not drawing weapons, not making threats, just shifting positions so that Boyd was surrounded, so that any move he made would be seen, would be anticipated, would be responded to with overwhelming force. The youngest one, Canyon, spoke for the first time. "I really wouldn't, man. We've all got cameras on our vests. Anything you do here is getting recorded from 6 angles. And unlike your cop friends, we don't make evidence disappear." Boyd's hand stopped moving. For a long moment, nobody moved. Rain dripped. Engines idled. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled, like a promise. Then Boyd lowered his hand. "This isn't over." "Yeah," Flint said. "It is. You're done in Arizona. You come near Wren again. You come near her mother. You even think about them too hard. And this recording goes to every law enforcement agency in the state, along with a full breakdown of your extortion scheme. We've got evidence, Boyd. We've got victims willing to talk now that they know someone's listening. You're finished." Boyd looked at Wren one last time, and she met his gaze without flinching. She'd spent too many years being afraid of men who thought they could control her through fear. She was done with that. "Go," she said quietly, "before you make this worse." He went. His truck roared to life and disappeared down Highway 89, taillights fading into the rain until they were gone. The silence that followed felt clean somehow, like after a fever breaks. Wren's legs chose that moment to give out adrenaline crash, hitting her all at once. Flint caught her before she hit the ground, lowered her carefully to sit on the wet asphalt. Thea was there immediately, hands checking her over with practiced efficiency. "We need to get her somewhere warm," Thea said. "That ankle needs to be wrapped properly, and she's going into shock." "Nearest hospital is 20 miles, Ironside said. "No hospital," Wren said through chattering teeth. Just somewhere dry. Please." Flint looked at his brothers, had an entire conversation in glances that lasted maybe 3 seconds. Then he nodded. "Canyon, call the clubhouse. Tell them we're bringing in a guest. We need the back room, ready medical supplies if we've got them. Ironside, you ride ahead, make sure everything's set. The rest of us will convoy with Wren and Thea." "I can't ride a motorcycle with a sprained ankle," Wren protested weakly. "Then you ride in the chase vehicle," Flint said. "We've got a van that follows on long runs. It's 10 minutes behind us. You wait here with your mother, I'll stay with you, and the boys will get everything ready. Sound good?" It wasn't really a question, and Wren didn't have the energy to argue anyway. She just nodded. The other bikers mounted up and roared away, leaving Flint, Wren, and Thea sitting on the shoulder of Highway 89 in the rain, waiting for rescue that was actually coming this time. 12 years, Wren said, finally looking at Flint. "You could have forgotten. Should have forgotten." "Some debts don't have expiration dates," Flint said. "You gave me my life back. Gave Kyle his life back. Tried to save Tommy even though he was already gone. That kind of thing doesn't just disappear because time passed. I didn't do it expecting payment. I know. That's why the debt matters." Thea pulled Wren closer, and they sat there in the rain. Three people who'd all made their own kinds of promises over the years, all learned their own lessons about what it meant to keep them. And when the van arrived driven by a woman with sharp eyes and gentle hands, who introduced herself as Mesa, nobody asked questions about who Ren was or why she mattered. They just helped her into the warm interior, wrapped her in blankets, elevated her ankle, and drove her toward the clubhouse like she was already family. Because in the world Flint McCade had built around himself in the charter he'd shaped with stories and codes, and promises kept, she already was. The Desert Sparrow had called, and the angels had answered. The Hells Angels clubhouse sat 15 miles outside Flagstaff, tucked into a valley where the desert started its slow transformation into pine country. It wasn't the kind of place you stumbled across by accident. No signs marked the turnoff from the county road. No lights advertised its presence. Just a long gravel driveway that wound through scrub oak and juniper until it opened onto a compound that looked more like a working ranch than anything Hollywood had taught people to expect from a motorcycle club. Low-slung buildings with metal roofs, a garage bay large enough to house a dozen bikes with room to spare, solar panels angled toward the southern sky, gardens, surprisingly vegetable plots, tended with care that spoke of people who knew the value of being self-sufficient when society kept you at arm's length. The van pulled up to the main building and Mesa killed the engine. "Home sweet home," she said, glancing back at Ren with a smile that held no judgment, just welcome. "Not what you expected." Ren realized she'd been holding her breath. "I don't know what I expected." "Most people don't," Mesa said. "That's why we like it out here. Nobody's expectations but our own." The door to the main building opened, and a woman emerged who looked to be in her 60s, gray hair and a long braid, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt that had seen 1,000 washings. She moved with the careful precision of someone whose body didn't quite work the way it used to, but who'd made peace with that reality. "That's Rosie," Mesa said. "She's our unofficial medic, trained as a combat nurse in Desert Storm before the VA benefits ran out and the nightmares started. Flint brought her into the charter about 8 years ago. Saved her life, probably. She returns the favor whenever one of us does something stupid, which is more often than we'd like to admit." Rosie opened the van door and looked at Ren with eyes that had seen their share of broken things. "Heard you sprained an ankle running from a drunk stalker. Let's get you inside and see what we're working with." Between Mesa and Rosie, they got Ren out of the van and into the clubhouse. Thea followed close behind her, hand never far from her daughter's shoulder, that maternal need to maintain contact with what she'd almost lost. The interior was warmer than Ren expected, cleaner. Wood floors worn smooth by years of boots, walls decorated with road maps and photos of men on motorcycles, a stone fireplace big enough to stand in where a fire crackled and popped. Furniture that didn't match but looked comfortable. Bookshelves surprisingly well stocked. A pool table, a bar area with coffee brewing, and nothing harder visible. They guided Ren to a back room that had been converted into something between a medical bay and a spare bedroom. A hospital bed, the kind with rails and controls for elevation. Cabinets stocked with supplies that looked professional grade. An oxygen tank, a crash cart that had seen better days but was still functional. "Told you," Mesa said to Rosie. "She's looking at everything like she's trying to figure out if we're real." "We get that a lot," Rosie said, helping Ren onto the bed. "People have certain ideas about what we are. Usually those ideas are wrong." She went to work on Ren's ankle with hands that were gentle despite their weathered appearance, removing the wet shoe and sock, probing carefully, watching Ren's face for pain responses. "Not broken," Rosie pronounced after a few minutes. "Grade 2 sprain, maybe grade 1. You got lucky. Ice compression elevation for the next 48 hours. Stay off it as much as possible. You'll be walking normal in a week or two." "Thank you," Ren said. "Don't thank me yet. I haven't told you what the bill is." Ren tensed. Rosie caught the reaction and laughed, not unkindly. "Relax, I'm kidding. We don't charge family, and anyone Flint says is under the charter's protection counts as family." She wrapped the ankle with practiced efficiency, then elevated it on pillows, adjusted the bed, so Ren was reclined but not flat. Mesa brought warm blankets from somewhere, and within minutes, Ren found herself warm and dry, for the first time in hours, the shivering finally starting to ease. Thea sat in a chair beside the bed, her own relief visible in the way her shoulders finally came down from around her ears. "You should have told me," Thea said quietly. "About Boyd, about the money." about any of it. I didn't want you to worry. I'm your mother. Worry is part of the job description. Thea reached over and took Ren's hand. We're supposed to face these things together. You've carried enough for me already, Ren said. After Dad died, after Warren, after everything. I just wanted to handle something on my own for once. And how'd that work out? Ren had to smile despite everything. Poorly. I'll admit that. Smart girl. The door opened and Flint entered, followed by Ironside and Canyon. They'd shed their wet vests, were down to t-shirts and jeans, looking more like regular men and less like the archetypes their leather had suggested. Flint carried a steaming mug in each hand. Coffee, he said, offering one to Thea and one to Ren. Real stuff, not the gas station swill. Mesa won't let us keep anything less in the house. Ren wrapped her hands around the mug, let the heat seep into her fingers. Thank you. For everything. I don't know how to even begin. You don't need to, Flint interrupted gently. We're square, remember. You saved my life. I made you a promise. Tonight that promise came due. That's how it works. Is it always this dramatic? Ren asked, aiming for humor and landing somewhere near hysteria. The promises, I mean. Do they always involve stalkers and extortion and people getting chased through the desert? Usually it's much more boring, Canyon offered. Jump-starting dead batteries mostly. Sometimes helping someone move furniture. Ironside snorted. Remember the widow in Prescott? Her promise was that we had to help her repaint her house. All of it. Took us 3 weekends. And she made cookies, Canyon said with reverence. Best snickerdoodles I've ever had in my life. Despite everything, Ren laughed. The sound felt foreign in her throat, like she'd forgotten how. I don't know how to make cookies. Good thing we're not asking you to, Flint said. He pulled up a chair, settled into it with the ease of someone who'd learned to be comfortable anywhere. What I am going to ask is what you want to do about Boyd Cooper. The humor drained out of the room like water through a sieve. What do you mean? Ren asked. I mean, we've got evidence of extortion. We've got his confession on tape. We can turn that over to the authorities, let them handle it through official channels. Or, Flint paused, choosing his words carefully, or we can handle it ourselves. Make sure he understands in terms that don't require lawyers or courts that he's done in Arizona. That if he comes near you again, there will be consequences he won't like. You're asking if I want you to threaten him, Ren said. I'm asking what justice looks like to you, Flint corrected, because the legal system doesn't always deliver it. You know that as well as anyone. Ren thought about Warren, about the restraining orders that didn't stop his fists, about the police who'd taken statements and filed reports and done exactly nothing that mattered. She thought about the judge who told her that marriage was sacred and maybe she should try harder to make it work. She thought about the system that had failed her over and over until she had stopped asking it for help. But she also thought about the woman she'd become in the years since, the one who'd learned that violence, even righteous violence, always left marks on the people who wielded it. I want the legal route, she said finally. I want the recording turned over to the sheriff. I want Boyd arrested if there's enough evidence. I want it done by the book. Flint studied her. Even knowing that might not work, that he might have friends who make it disappear. Even knowing that, Ren confirmed. Because if I let fear of failure stop me from trying to do things the right way, then he wins anyway. He's already made me hide for 12 years. I won't let him make me compromise who I am now. Ironside nodded slowly. Respectable. Harder road, though. Usually is, Ren agreed. "'Kay," Flint said, and she could hear the respect in his voice. "We'll do it your way, but the offer stands. If the legal route fails, if he comes back, if you need a different kind of protection, you call us. That's still the deal." "Thank you," Ren said, truly. They talked for a while longer, working out the practicalities. Ironside knew a sheriff's deputy in Coconino County, a straight shooter who wouldn't bury evidence just because Boyd had friends. They'd turn over the recording first thing in the morning, along with statements from everyone who'd witnessed the confrontation on Highway 89. Flint had already called a tow company about Ren's dead Toyota, had it brought to a mechanic he trusted, who'd give an honest assessment of whether it was worth fixing or if it was time to let it go. "You can stay here tonight," Rosie said when the conversation wound down. "Both of you, we've got rooms. They're not fancy, but they're clean and warm and safe. In the morning, we'll figure out next steps." Thea looked at Ren, a question in her eyes. I'd like that, Ren said, if it's not too much trouble. No trouble at all, Mesa said, appearing in the doorway like she'd been waiting for her cue. Come on, Thea, I'll show you where you can get cleaned up and find you something dry to wear. Your daughter's in good hands here. After they left, the room fell quiet. Flint remained in his chair, seeming in no hurry to leave. Canyon had disappeared at some point. Ironside leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, a solid presence that somehow made the room feel safer just by being in it. Can I ask you something? Ren said finally. Anything, Flint replied. Why did you really make that promise 12 years ago in the cabin? You didn't know me, didn't know if you'd ever see me again. Why commit to something like that? Flint was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing patterns on the armrest of his chair. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of truth that had been examined and found genuine. Because in my life, I've been helped by a lot of people who didn't have to help me. And I've been hurt by a lot of people who were supposed to protect me. The difference between those two groups wasn't power or money or status. It was choice. The people who helped me chose to see my humanity even when it wasn't convenient. The people who hurt me chose to see whatever was useful to them and nothing else. He looked up, met Ren's eyes. You chose to see three men bleeding on a highway as human beings who needed help. Not as criminals, not as threats, not as problems, just as people. And then you risked yourself to help us even though you had every reason to keep driving. That kind of choice is rare, Ren. That kind of courage is worth protecting. So I made you a promise because I wanted you to know that your choice mattered, that it would be remembered, that if you ever needed someone to choose your humanity over their convenience, we'd be there. Ren felt tears burning behind her eyes. I didn't feel courageous. I felt terrified. Courage isn't the absence of fear, Ironside said from the doorway. It's doing the thing anyway. You know how many people drove past us that day on Highway 95 before you turned around? We counted later from tire tracks. 17. 17 vehicles saw what was happening and kept going. But you stopped. That's not nothing. It felt like nothing at the time, Ren admitted. It felt like the bare minimum of human decency. Then you've got a higher standard for decency than most, Flint said, which is probably why you're sitting here with a sprained ankle instead of safe at home. You saw Dalton as someone struggling instead of just a threat. You tried to de-escalate instead of just running. Even when you did run, you didn't want him to get hurt for being stupid and heartbroken. He was being manipulated by his brother, Ren said. That's not the same as being evil. No, Flint agreed, it's not. But most people wouldn't make that distinction when they're being chased through the desert. The fact that you did tells me everything I need to know about who you are. And who's that? Someone worth riding through a storm for. The simple sincerity of it hit Ren harder than any grand declaration could have. She looked at this man, this stranger who'd become something else over the course of one long night, and she realized something that should have been obvious from the start. You're not what people think you are, she said. The club, the angels, all of it. It's not what the world assumes. No, Flint said. We're not. But we stopped trying to convince people of that a long time ago. Easier to let them think what they want and just live by our own code. What is your code? Protect our own, keep our promises, show up when it matters. Everything else is just details. Rosie returned with more blankets and a sleep aid she suggested Ren take if she wanted to actually rest instead of lying awake replaying the night's events. Ren accepted it gratefully, feeling the adrenaline crash giving way to exhaustion, so profound her bones felt like lead. Before Flint left, he paused at the door. The tattoo, he said, on your shoulder, you kept it. Ren's hand went automatically to her left shoulder, though the tattoo was hidden under borrowed clothes. Yeah, I kept it. Why, if you didn't believe in the promise, because it reminded me of the person I was when I got it, Ren said. The person who just saved someone's life. The person who was stronger than she thought. I needed that reminder more days than I can count. Flint nodded slowly. In the morning when you're feeling better, I'd like to show you something. If you're willing. What? A place about 60 miles from here. It's important, but it can wait until you're ready. Curiosity prickled, but exhaustion won. Okay, in the morning. He left and Ren was alone with her thoughts and the sleep aid slowly pulling her under. The last thing she remembered before darkness claimed her was the sound of voices in the other room. Her mother laughing at something Mesa said, the ordinary sound of people being. People no different from any other gathering, except for the leather and the motorcycles and the promises that held it all together. She slept. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she slept without nightmares. Morning came gentle sunlight filtering through curtains someone had drawn while she slept. Wren woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, to the sound of her mother's voice engaged in animated conversation with someone whose laugh was unfamiliar but warm. Her ankle throbbed, but the sharp pain had faded to a dull ache that was manageable. Someone had left clothes on the chair beside her bed, clean jeans and a soft flannel shirt that smelled like lavender and sunshine. Crutches leaned against the wall, the kind with padded grips that wouldn't destroy your armpits. She managed to get dressed with some difficulty, grateful that whoever had chosen the clothes had picked something with an elastic waist that would go over her swollen ankle. The crutches were awkward at first, but she found her rhythm after a few experimental steps. The main room of the clubhouse was busier than it had been the night before. A dozen people, maybe more men and women both. Some wearing the leather vests that marked them as full members, others in civilian clothes. The atmosphere was more breakfast diner than biker gang, people moving around the kitchen, with practice choreography, plates being filled, coffee being poured, conversations overlapping in comfortable chaos. Thea sat at the long wooden table with Mesa and Rosie, all three women engaged in a discussion that involved a lot of hand gestures and laughter. She looked up when Wren hobbled in, and her whole face transformed with relief. "There she is," Thea said, standing to help Wren to a chair. "How's the ankle?" "Better," Wren said. "Still hurts, but I can handle it." "Rosie's orders are ice and elevation every few hours," Thea reported. "And I've been instructed to make sure you actually follow them, which we both know is going to be a challenge." "I'm a terrible patient," Wren admitted. "The worst," Thea agreed, but she was smiling. "Must be genetic. Your grandmother was the same way." A plate appeared in front of Wren loaded with eggs and bacon and toast that looked homemade. Canyon set it down with a shy smile. "Mesa says you need to eat. Said nurses are the worst about taking care of themselves." "Mesa's not wrong," Wren said, picking up a fork. The food was better than it had any right to be, seasoned, perfectly cooked with care. "Who made this?" "Ironside," Canyon said. "He cooks breakfast every Sunday. Used to be a line cook before he patched in. Some of the guys give him grief about it, but they shut up when it's time to eat." Wren ate while the conversations flowed around her, gradually becoming aware of the dynamics at play. This wasn't a gang, not in any sense that word usually carried. It was a family complete with the hierarchies and histories and inside jokes that all families developed. People teased each other with the affection of siblings, helped without being asked because that's what you did. Made space for newcomers, which was apparently what she and Thea had become overnight, without any of the awkwardness that usually came with being an outsider. Flint emerged from one of the back rooms, saw Wren was up, and headed over. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Like I got chased through the desert and sprained my ankle," Wren said. "But better than I expected." "Good, because I still want to show you that place I mentioned, if you're up for a drive." "What kind of place?" "The cabin," Flint said simply, "where you saved my life 12 years ago. I finally found it again about 6 months back. Took me years of looking, but I found it, and I think you should see it." Wren's breath caught. She'd thought about that cabin over the years, wondered if it was still standing, or if the desert had reclaimed it the way the desert eventually reclaimed everything. She'd never gone back, never tried to find it, because that chapter of her life had felt closed. But maybe it wasn't as closed as she'd thought. "Okay," she said, "let's go." The drive took 90 minutes in the van, Mesa at the wheel with Flint riding shotgun and Wren and Thea in the back. They headed west toward Nevada, the landscape gradually shifting from Arizona pine country back to the high desert scrub that Wren remembered from 12 years ago. The cabin, when they finally reached it, looked smaller than Wren's memory had made it. Time and weather had been harsh. The wood weathered to gray, one corner of the roof sagging where a support beam had finally given up. The windows were empty frames, glass long since broken by wind or vandals, or just entropy. But it was still standing. Mesa parked the van and they all got out, Wren managing the uneven ground with her crutches better than expected. Flint led the way to the cabin door, which hung crooked on rusted hinges. Inside, dust motes danced in the sunlight, streaming through the broken windows. Most of the furniture Wren remembered was gone, taken by scavengers, or collapsed into decay. But on one wall, barely visible under years of grime, she could still see the charcoal drawing, the skull with wings. Her drawing, the one she'd helped Flint create that night, when he'd been feverish and half delirious with pain and determined to give her something to remember him by. Flint walked to the wall, traced the outline with one finger. I've been coming here every few months since I found it again, cleaning it up a little, making sure it doesn't collapse completely. It felt important, you know, this place where everything changed. Wren moved closer, leaning on her crutches, staring at the drawing that had become a part of her skin, a part of her identity. You really never forgot. I told you, Flint said. Some debts don't expire. It wasn't a debt, Wren said softly. It was just the right thing to do. Maybe, Flint said, but the right thing to do and a debt aren't mutually exclusive. You gave me my life back. The least I could do was make sure yours was protected if you ever needed it. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something wrapped in leather. Unfolding it carefully, he revealed a bracelet woven from strips of leather and decorated with small metal beads. It was worn clearly old but well maintained. I found this here, he said. When I came back the first time, it was in the corner, half buried under fallen plaster. Did you make this? Wren stared at it, memory flooding back. Yes. During the days while you were sleeping, I didn't have much to do and my hands needed something to occupy them, or I'd start thinking too much about what I'd just done, what could have happened. I braided that from a piece of leather I found in the cabin, probably from one of my grandfather's old projects. I didn't think anyone would ever see it. I've worn it every day for 6 months, Flint said, holding up his wrist to show an identical bracelet. Had one of the guys who does leather work make me a copy, wanted to keep the original safe. He offered it to her. Wren took it with trembling hands, the leather soft and supple despite its age. Inside, she could see initials carved into one of the metal beads, initials she'd put there without really thinking about it. Niham. I didn't remember doing that, she whispered. You did a lot that week, Thea said quietly from behind them. More than anyone should have had to. I did what needed doing, Wren said. But looking at the bracelet, at the cabin, at the evidence of that week preserved like a time capsule, she felt something shift inside her. I spent so long trying to forget this part of my life. The running, the fear, the violence. I wanted to be someone different, someone who'd never been hurt, never been scared. So I buried all of it, good and bad, together. She looked up at Flint. But the good parts mattered too, didn't they? The fact that I stopped. The fact that I helped. The fact that I was capable of courage even when I didn't feel courageous. Those parts were real too. They were the most real parts, Flint said. Wren tied the bracelet around her wrist, the leather settling against her skin like it had always belonged there. Thank you for keeping this place, for remembering, for making sure that week wasn't just erased from history. It was never going to be erased, Flint said. Not from my history anyway. This is where I learned that the world had more kindness in it than I thought. Where I learned that sometimes strangers are just family you haven't met yet. They stayed at the cabin for an hour, Wren showing her mother the spots where she'd slept, where she'd done the medical work, where she'd sat up at night listening to Flint's breathing and praying he'd make it to morning. Flint told stories about the aftermath, about Kyle's recovery, about the memorial they'd held for Tommy Vega, about the promise that had become legend within the charter. And slowly, piece by piece, Wren felt something she hadn't even realized was broken start to knit back together. The part of her that had been fractured by years of hiding, of pretending that week had never happened, of treating her own courage as something shameful that needed to be concealed. She'd saved a life. She'd risked herself for strangers. She'd been strong when it mattered, and that was nothing to be ashamed of. On the drive back to Flagstaff, Wren asked the question that had been building since the night before. What happens now, after all this? Flint glanced back at her from the front seat. What do you want to happen? I don't know, Wren admitted. My car's dead. My apartment is okay, but nothing special. I've been working at the same clinic for 8 years doing good work, but not exactly setting the world on fire. I've been living small, you know, keeping my head down, not making waves. And now, Thea prompted, now I'm thinking maybe I've been living small for too long, Wren said. Maybe it's time to live bigger. Mesa spoke up from the driver's seat. You know what this town needs? A real clinic for people who fall through the cracks. Veterans, homeless folks, people without insurance. Free care, no questions asked. We've got a lot of both in this area, and the closest free clinic is 2 counties over. That would take money, Wren said. Staff, resources I don't have. You'd be surprised what you have access to when you ask the right people, Flint said. The charter does charity rides, raises money for causes we believe in. Veterans care is already one of our priorities, and we've got connections to other clubs, other chapters, other people who might want to contribute to something that matters. You're serious, Wren said, understanding dawning. Dead serious, Flint replied. You saved my life. Now let us help you save others. Seems like a fair trade. The idea took root in Wren's mind like a seed finding good soil. A clinic, a place where people like her younger self running from domestic violence could get medical care without needing to explain the bruises. A place where veterans struggling with PTSD could access treatment without navigating the VA bureaucracy. A place where doing the right thing wasn't conditional on ability to pay. I'd need to think about it, she said. Plan it properly. Figure out the logistics. Of course, Flint said, but when you're ready, we're here. 3 months later, the Morrison Clinic opened its doors in a renovated building on the outskirts of Flagstaff. The Hells Angels had organized a charity ride that brought in $40,000. Local businesses had donated supplies. Rosie had signed on as a volunteer nurse along with 3 other medical professionals who'd heard about the project and wanted to be part of something meaningful. Thea worked the front desk 3 days a week, greeting patients with the warmth that came from knowing firsthand what it meant to need help and not know where to find it. And Wren, wearing scrubs and the leather bracelet that never left her wrist, treated everyone who walked through the door with the same care she'd given to 3 bleeding bikers on a desert highway 12 years earlier. Because some things didn't change. Some promises, once made, rippled forward through time. And some debts, when they were finally repaid, turned into something better than obligation. They turned into purpose. 6 months after the clinic opened, Wren received an envelope in the mail. No return address, but the postmark was from a VA hospital in Phoenix. Inside was a single piece of paper, a letter written in careful block print. Ms. Morrison, you don't know me, but I'm writing to thank you. 3 weeks ago, I came to your clinic because I was having chest pains and couldn't afford to go to the emergency room. Your staff treated me with kindness and competence, ran the tests that needed running, and figured out I was having a heart attack before it got bad enough to kill me. The doctor you called saved my life, but you're the reason I walked through those doors in the first place. You made it safe to ask for help. I'm a veteran, served 2 tours in Iraq, came home with PTSD and a drinking problem, and no faith left in systems that are supposed to help people like me. But your clinic was different. Nobody judged. Nobody made me feel small for needing help. I'm writing this from rehab now. 90 days sober, working on getting my life back together. And it started with walking through your door. Thank you for being there. Thank you for making a place where people like me can find help without shame. You saved my life. Sincerely, Dalton Cooper. Wren read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Then she folded it carefully and put it in the drawer where she kept important things. The bracelet. The original photograph her mother had shown to Flint that night in the diner. A patch from the Hells Angels that said honorary family. And now this letter proof that the ripples kept spreading, that kindness multiplied itself in ways you could never predict. That evening after the clinic closed, Wren drove out to the clubhouse. She found Flint in the garage working on his bike, hands covered in grease concentration absolute. He looked up when she approached, concern crossing his face. Everything okay? Better than okay, Wren said. She handed him the letter. He read it slowly, his expression shifting from curiosity to understanding to something that might have been pride. He got help. He got help, Wren confirmed, because we gave him a place where asking for help was safe. Flint set the letter aside, carefully respectful of its importance. You know what this means, right? What? It means the promise worked. 12 years ago, you saved my life. Last year, I helped save yours. And now together we built something that's saving others. That's not debt anymore, that's legacy. Wren thought about that word. Legacy. It felt too big for someone like her, someone who'd spent most of her adult life just trying to survive. But maybe survival was its own kind of legacy. Maybe choosing kindness when you had every reason to choose bitterness was a legacy too. I'm glad you found me, she said quietly. That night in the rain. I'm glad my mother was brave enough to ask for help. I'm glad you remembered. Always, Flint said simply. Some things are too important to forget. They stood there in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from shared understanding, from having walked through fire and come out the other side, still capable of building something beautiful from the ashes. And outside, the desert sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, the same colors it had worn 12 years ago when Wren Morrison had made the choice to turn her car around on Highway 95. The same colors it would wear tomorrow and the day after and all the days beyond. Because the desert remembered, the road remembered, and some promises once made in blood and kept in honor became the stories people told to remind themselves that the world still had heroes in it. They just didn't always look the way you expected. Sometimes they looked like a scared nurse with a first aid kit. Sometimes they looked like bikers in leather who showed up in the rain. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, they looked like both.